Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'll tell you, we have a fascinating book that couldn't come more appropriate at this time in our country than what is going on right now with the issue of Benghazi in the news again. And it's been a couple years, but it has always been kind of percolating in the background. What really happened? What do we know about it? And the picture that we're being told, is it really as accurate as what the State Department and some in Congress have been saying, or is there another story to it? Aaron Klein is a New York Times bestselling author. He's written a book called The Real Benghazi Story. And one of the guys that really helped him with writing this book is Joshua Klein. It's great to have you with us, Joshua. Appreciate it. I think this is very appropriate, and I think your background is fascinating too. You were the main researcher for this book, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I did was the senior researcher for the book, put all the material together. It was really divined from, I would say, thousands of pages of government documents that came out from hundreds of hours of watching Senate hearings, House hearings. So everything that's written in this book, it's important to understand that none of it is based on opinion or speculation. Everything we write is factual and based on the facts of the government itself that came out with these documents stating those things.
All right. I want to let our viewers and listeners know that Joshua is an ex-fighter in the Israeli military, and he served as senior researcher for this, as he mentioned. Also, he's the executive producer for the weekend program Aaron Klein Investigates Radio. I'm assuming Aaron is your brother. Am I right?
Yep, he is my older brother.
Okay. I was wondering, I thought there must be a relationship there. You also are a video editor for WND, WorldNet Daily, is that right?
Yeah, I do video editing for them. WorldNet Daily, yeah, it's a huge online website, news website. So I've been involved with them for about 2 years now, and also doing executive producing for Aaron's weekend radio show on CLN.
Okay. Look, I think that all of this really came to head once again after we had the Benghazi hearings, and a lot of us were wondering, we're not hearing the whole thing. It's when Hillary Clinton was before the Senate committee, and she made this statement now that is forever will probably haunt her about why does it really matter the details of what happened. And I think red flags went up in brains throughout the United States and maybe the world saying, well, what happened really does have an impact on what the United States is doing around the globe, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and all of those things. So take us back, realizing that you've got all this information. Let's distill it down. Back in 2012, the United States in Libya, we were in Benghazi. What were we doing there at that consulate?
So right off the bat, that term consulate is incorrect, unfortunately. Most people are under the impression, and rightfully so, because they've been bombarded from the media and with that term consulate or embassy. And really that stems from, if you remember the video story, that they blamed this whole thing on a video, and that escalated into a protest by an embassy that we had in Benghazi. So that story can somewhat make sense, you know, if you can believe that the video happened. But it can only make sense if there was the location of an embassy or a consulate in Benghazi in the first place.
Realizing then that it wasn't a consulate, it wasn't an embassy, from what your research is, what was that facility used for?
So, I mean, we were able to divine certain aspects from open source material from news reports, and some government documents did come out. And hopefully during the House Select Committee that's starting up actually tomorrow, I would hope that they would try and get some answers on this, because we know that it wasn't a consulate or an embassy. So what sort of activity exactly was going on there? And Benghazi was like downtown terrorism, the center of it in Libya. So primarily, it seems what was going on there, you kind of have to have a little bit of a history lesson. Before Ambassador Christopher Stevens became ambassador, during the overthrow of Gaddafi originally, when the NATO was striking and helping the so-called rebels on the ground, arming them like we're talking about doing now in Syria, providing air power and having rebels fight on the ground for us. That's the exact template that we used in Libya. So in 2011, during this NATO action overthrowing Gaddafi, Christopher Stevens, who wasn't an ambassador at the time, actually was sent in. He was officially, his title was called the liaison to the transitional government, which was really militia groups and terrorist groups based in Benghazi. He arrives there on a Greek cargo ship and hidden in the middle of the night, sets up shop in the same place, Benghazi. This is where the initial mission even is created from, was during this time. And it was that place where he was facilitating weapons to then the so-called rebels. And these so-called rebels actually openly admitted to being known terrorists, Al-Qaeda terrorists. They admitted that they fought the U.S. in Iraq. They fought the U.S. in Afghanistan. So Christopher Stevens, this was during, again, the overthrow of Gaddafi. He was officially facilitating weapons to these rebels that were terrorists. And, you know, so that's the kind of, that was what the mission was originally set up for in the first place.
So why hasn't this come out more? Why haven't we heard this?
Because people don't, I mean, the mainstream media really doesn't have such an interest in emphasizing such aspects of the story for some reason. This is all available. This is straight from the Accountability Review Board set up by Hillary Clinton to review the actions of what happened in Benghazi. This is all stated in these documents. That was about a 54-page document, and you could see it right there. It's, you know, a paragraph or two within it. So that's really that's why we call it the Real Benghazi story, because there was so much misinformation originally put out to obviously cover up something. Why would you put out misinformation? Why would you lie to the U.S. people, actually spend their taxpayer money doing it? If there was nothing to cover up in the first place, you could have just been honest and explained what happened. So it's clear there was a cover-up, so what were they covering up? And that's really what we exposed in the book. And really, it's all based, again, on just snippets from thousands of pages of government documents that the media just chose to ignore.
Okay, so let me get this straight then. It was Christopher Stevens was an ambassador, but he was there, you're saying, as in a covert operational mode, kind of sneaked into Libya, setting up shop, but it wasn't a consulate, even though that's what everyone is referring to it as. It was, what did you call it again? More of a special shop of some sort?
So actually, it's interesting that it's called a special mission compound, and okay. So far that the White House actually, when doing, remember the talking points controversy, that was one of the aspects of the scandal. They came out the day before Susan Rice famously went on those 5 talk show hosts, and they said that the only word that they changed in the talking points was the word consulate to special mission compound. So that's how important the terminology is and what it actually means.
All right, so he's in this special mission compound doing what could have been selling arms, which normally I don't think ambassadors get into a direct negotiation with, but you're saying that's what he was doing. So I would imagine that's why the whole security aspect wasn't as it would have been under a normal consulate or an ambassadorship, because this was supposed to be under the radar from what you're saying, right?
It was really, it was under the radar to such an extent that there was no U.S. flag there, obviously. There was no, they were trying to be covert as possible. They actually requested, in a cable that we point out in the book, they just simply requested a guard tower and a machine gun just in case, you know, they were attacked the same way that they were on September 11th by tremendous amounts of people. The response they got was no, and the reason for that no is that they felt that a guard tower would attract too much attention to this facility. So you can see that the government themselves had an interest in, for some reason, not attracting any attention to a facility that most people think is an embassy or a consulate where you can get your passport renewed.
Wow. Amazing. Okay, I'll tell you what, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back and talk more about this. We've got the premise now for it all, which is far deeper than what I thought it had been. The book is called The Real Benghazi Story, and our guest is Joshua Klein, who is a senior researcher for this particular book, and we're going to continue our discussion with him in just a couple of minutes.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Welcome back to Focus Today. Our guest is Joshua Klein. He's a senior researcher for this book called The Real Benghazi Story, written by Aaron Klein. And we're finding out things that we hadn't heard before in the news media. I just don't think this was covered anywhere else. Aaron, this is fascinating. Let me, based on the question I have for you next, I want to make sure that I've got this clear again. You're saying that Christopher Stevens, the ambassador, was in Benghazi, Libya in 2012 on a covert operation in a special mission compound, not a consulate or an ambassador location, which I know people might say, well, you're parsing words, except those are specific designations for the function of a building and how it should be protected. And so I think that makes a big difference. Is this why we didn't have the kinds of security that a normal ambassador would have at his residence or at a consulate?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if it was an embassy, actually embassies are required to meet a minimum security standard. This facility actually required a waiver. That's where Hillary Clinton's involvement with this building actually gets into the story. It needed a waiver signed because it didn't meet the minimum security requirements to house an ambassador. So the waiver was needed.
And in fact, that's exactly what I want to ask you about. Her particular role in this is, I think it's hard to assume that a Secretary of State would know about every single thing going on around the world, but this seems to be an important enough thing that she should have known about this. From your indication, did she know what was going on with Chris Stevens and the possible selling of military hardware, from what you've said?
I would have to say with 99.9% certainty that yes, because actually, and this is reported by the New York Times and many other outlets, she was actually the architect of this plan to arm rebels now after we did it in Syria, to use that same template and to move on to arm rebels in Syria, which you're actually hearing about in the news right now. Is what we are planning on doing to take out ISIS, is to supposedly arm these rebels. So Clinton herself, she was the architect of this plan. It had the support of the CIA, David Petraeus, and other higher-ups in the military. So she's all over this in so many different aspects. And
so she can't, from what you're saying, plead innocence about, well, I didn't really know about the specific operation of what was going on. You're saying she was intimately involved.
Yeah, if you remember, even Rand Paul, during the questioning of Clinton at the hearing, he asked her specifically about this issue of was there arms transfers going on from this mission onto Turkey, onto Syria via Turkey or any country, and she was parsing her words so specifically. She never said no. She said, I would have to look into it. I would have to get back to you in writing. So she, like, you know, it's an interesting part of the hearing that completely was avoided by her. And supposedly she was going to answer it in the classified version. There was two versions of the Accountability Review Board, one that is known and then the classified version. So I assume that she answered some of these questions there. And then also yesterday we had a bombshell report come out by Cheryl Atkinson, the only one in the mainstream media that did any real reporting on Benghazi and paid a heavy price for it, of, if true, this one of the main people at the State Department at the time that was actually held accountable for what happened. He said that he walked in, like, during the time when the ARB, the Accountability Review Board, was asking for documents, not asking, they subpoenaed them, and they are legally required to turn over every single one. He walked into a basement operation of them separating papers into two stacks, one that they were going to send on to the review board and one that wasn't. If that accusation turns out to be true, then that is a tremendous scandal. It undermines the basis of her entire defense, which was this Accountability Review Board. And if they didn't have access to, most of the information, and she specifically, and they said she was the one calling the shots on that report, which is really interesting.
Well, if Hillary Clinton was in charge of this particular special operation, this mission compound, could she have done that without the president knowing what's going on? Does the Secretary of State, from what you've been able to research, have that latitude?
Officially, she doesn't. I mean, she would need a presidential authority, but it could be very much could be that Obama did not know about it and she went ahead with it anyway. So that's really a question that I'm hoping the Select Committee will get to the bottom of, because if you look at the response that night of Obama, all we know is that he met with the chief of staff and the defense minister for a couple minutes, told them to do whatever you have to do, and kind of went off to bed, and then went to a fundraising event the next day in Vegas. Well, Hillary Clinton was, in the State Department Situation Room, monitoring and responding to this event in real time all night. So why was she so hands-on? What was her interest? And I think that speaks a lot of volumes.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating then, because then what that would do is, although the buck stops here, so to speak, with the president, if he had said, well, do what you need to do, she would have been the kingmaker, so to speak, about the specifics of all of this. Are you expecting more information to come out in hearings? Because the first ones were pretty celebrated. Sometimes the second round is a little bit more of a deflated event. What are you anticipating to have happen with this?
I mean, I hold out hope that we will find out more information, but I am just very suspicious, and I guess you can say because it took them about 2 years just to form the Select Committee that they could have done 2 years ago if they were interested in that. They had control over the House. They were forced to do it just kicking and screaming because so many people demanded it. So why weren't they, forming the Select Committee 2 years ago? Why are they, only doing it after 2 years of being dragged on? And the possibility is that it could be that this went so high up that there could be some Republicans actually that might be somewhat implicated and had some knowledge also that we document in the book of what was transpiring there, and they wouldn't want that revealed either. So that could be a reason for the reluctance to form a Select Committee. You've just with what you've said here, and we haven't had a chance to read the book, The Real Benghazi Story by Aaron Klein, you've discussed a lot of things that are critical that I don't think have been made public. What else do we need to know from your research and Aaron's writing in this book that really are important for the American people to understand? There's just so many different aspects of the lies that we were told and just never really reported on, such as, there were protests, for example, they said that day before in Egypt, and that also had to do with the video, and then that kind of spiraled over into Libya. Well, we actually looked into what were these protests in Egypt. These protests in Egypt had nothing to do with the video, nothing whatsoever. They were planned months in advance. CNN Nick Robinson, actually the day of the protest, during the protest itself, he was reporting on the ground there, and what those protests in Egypt were over was actually something called freeing someone called a blind sheik, who was responsible for the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993. And we have to kind of go back also a little bit in history at that time. The Egyptian government was overthrown, and Mohammed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood was in power at the time. And actually a central platform and a central promise that he made to his people, or that he was going to free the blind sheik. So that's actually what the protest in Egypt preceding the attack in Libya had to do with. We were told that it was, a spillover from that. So just putting that in context really also explains a lot of things. Then just another fact, post this attack, after they blamed the video, they actually went on a week after the attack, and now we can say 100% that they knew either in real time or for sure at least a day after the attack that it had nothing to do with this video, yet Hillary Clinton and President Obama spent $70,000 of U.S. taxpayer money to air 7 ads in Pakistan a week later to apologize over the video and any offense that it may have caused to the Muslims, and it's just unbelievable that they would do that.
Do you think that a lot of people who are seeing those ads were wondering what in the world were they talking about, because they probably hadn't seen them?
Exactly. So all they accomplished, besides wasting taxpayer money, besides perpetuating a lie more and more onto the U.S. people, all it did was just create more awareness in the Muslim world that had no idea about this obscure video. Now they do, because they're watching these ads, and it actually incited violence. And there was like 50, 60 people killed in the following protest after these ads played. So it accomplished nothing. It'd be terrible consequences.
You know, when these types of things come to light, we would like to think that there is a cause and effect in our government, but I'm seeing so much of what we see happening, people just kind of shrugging their shoulders, and I know I'm speaking in very broad terms, but even Congress, I don't see the resolve to really do much about it. Is there a level of frustration that you and Aaron have when you see the evidence that you've been able to amass to make your case and the reaction that we're getting from our elected leaders and maybe the public at large?
I think the public at large has to do with it. I mean, they're so apathetic. I never would have imagined that the U.S. government, I mean, like, they do things here and there, but would lie, blatantly lie, intentionally, over and over and over again, and so many different people. And I'm not talking about low-level people. The President of the United States of America, the Secretary of State, would go on camera and lie to the American people numerous times. So it really, you know, touched a nerve in me where I kind of just really lost a little bit of faith in just the government of this country and the people that are running it. So that was just really something that touched me in an unfortunate kind of way, just after researching this book.
So what is the next step that you see happening? I mean, is there any chance that you or Aaron could actually be brought before one of the congressional hearings to talk about the research you've done, or is this something that you just don't want to really get into?
It's possible. I can tell you that a lot of the information that we do send over, we send a lot of information over to certain congressmen, and they do use that information then during the hearings to formulate their questions to the witnesses. Rand Paul, we've worked with, and he's done that. He's asked a lot of questions based on our research, yeah, I mean, I don't know if we'll be in front of the committee. If they would like us to, we'd be more than happy to go there and ask a lot of questions that I would like answered.
Well, I would think that if there's research of value like what you've come up with, that they would do that, but we'll have to see. Josh, it's been great talking with you. Joshua Klein, he's a senior researcher for the book called The Real Benghazi Story, written by Aaron Klein. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate you enlightening us. And I know we've hardly touched any part of it, but you know, what you have mentioned is something that I think is going to spur a lot of people to want to read this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right, stay tuned. Coming up on Focus today, we've got another individual who's been to Israel recently. We're going to be talking to him about his experience there, especially with the conflict with Gaza and Israel. It's all coming up on Focus today.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at theDove TV. You know, compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market. But at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Welcome back to Focus today, and in the studio we have with us a guy that you have seen before. It's been a while though. Jeff Shelton is with us. When was the last time you were here? It was months ago, I think, wasn't it?
It was months ago, yes.
Yeah, Jeff is involved with a whole lot of organizations. In fact, I'd like you to outline, you have a real desire to assist and help people in Israel, and give a feel for what it is your organizations do over there.
Well, primarily, Steve, what we're doing now is we have a villa in Caesarea. It's called the Caesarea Villa. Isn't that?
You know, that would be appropriate.
Very creative.
Yeah.
And this is a home that, well, it's a villa that holds about 24 people.
Okay.
We obtained it primarily so we can take Christian people there to work with Holocaust survivors.
And this was years ago that you started this, was it?
We only started this 2 years ago.
2 years ago, okay.
What's happening among Holocaust survivors, there's about 190,000 of them left. They're dying, 6 months ago they were dying at the rate of 30 a day. Now they're dying at the rate of 50 a day because of their age.
Yeah.
But many of these survivors are coming to know Jesus as their Messiah. Now, this is an exciting event.
Wow.
This is an exciting event because and they'll tell you historically why they're doing it. Alexander, who is a friend of mine, a survivor that lives in Arad down by Sodom and Gomorrah and Zoar, when I asked him, Alexander, why are so many survivors coming to Jesus as their Messiah? And he said, because 65 years ago, these people with this light in their eyes came to us, and they hid us, and they fed us, and they protected us from the Nazis. And in lieu of the fact they might lose their own lives, and these people called themselves the people of Jesus. And 65 years later, these people with this light in their eyes are coming to us again, and they're loving us, and they're taking pictures with us, and they're hugging us, and they're singing songs with us. And so when I sat down with Alexander, he's a Russian Jewish Holocaust survivor. Many people don't know, but when the survivors ran to the east, we call them the group that were in the evacuations, not in the camps or the ghettos.
They were leaving. They were getting out of the area.
They ran for their lives to the east, and they ran right into the hands of the Russians. And the Russians, many of them were drafted, put on the front lines, and killed by the Nazis when the Russians and the Nazis were fighting each other. Many of them then, many people don't know this, but many of them after the war still spent another 7 to 9 years in Russian camps.
So and they ran actually and were put in Russian concentration camps? Wow.
Except they didn't starve them, and they didn't gas them, or
a different kind.
Yeah, they just contained them, and then they were released any place from 7 to 9 years later. So the Holocaust continued in Russia, in a sense, by incarcerating so many of them. Now, in 1992, a great number of Russian Jews left Russia, about 628,000 over the next 6 years. And then in that group, there were about 250,000 Holocaust survivors. And they are the ones now that are not only major contributors to the growth of Israel, they have not been a weight, they have not been a burden to Israel. Actually, they've brought into the country a lot of talent, skills, and they have enhanced the culture and the civilization, the growth of Israel going from a third world nation to what it is now, which is I guess you'd call them a first world nation. Wow. A modern nation.
Country, yeah.
And so it's really interesting that the effect on Israel in terms of Christian influence now is not among the younger people as much, although there's a tremendous move of the Lord among military, IDF members.
Really? Yeah?
Yes, yeah, Bible studies and Christian influence there. But a lot of the influence is among these elderly Jews.
So it's kind of like the seed was sown years ago by Christians, and now you're kind of reaping it with what you're doing.
65 years ago. It's an amazing story of God's plan to bring the Jews to Himself.
Yeah.
So it's a great...
Amazing. Okay, so when you were there a couple months ago, that was in the beginning stages of the Gaza conflict, when the bombs were starting to drop around. How far is that from where your operation is?
Well, this was the first time that any rockets ever got close to Caesarea. Caesarea is about as far away from any border, whether it be north or east or south. It's about farther away from any border in the country that you can get. And the closest any kind of missile ever got to Caesarea before was up in the Judean hills when Saddam Hussein sent some Scud missiles over to try to hit the main power plant in Hadera, which is right adjacent to Caesarea. This time we had a few rockets that came within a couple of miles.
Wow.
So.
And so you were there, and you kind of come and go. You have people there who are helping right now over there? You've kind of done that?
Yeah, we have a whole network now of people that go back and forth. The Rogue Valley, this area, Southwest Oregon, we have had more people in Israel involved in missions work there, or ministry. We don't use the word mission, but
at your compound area there?
Yes, and throughout the country for everything from the Feast of Tabernacles Christian celebration to various kinds of benevolent work. We have had more people per capita out of this area of the United States help in Israel than any other place in the U.S.
Is that because of your
well, several people.
Your influence?
Several people come. Ron Swanson, Pastor Swanson goes. Ron Timon has been involved. And a number of cooperative pastors in the area and people here that have gone numbers of times. Many of them now we took originally. Now they go on their own. So which is we're very pleased about, because we're doing other things, and this just has broadened the ministry between both Arabs and Jews and Christians, because we don't work exclusively with Jewish people.
How do you contact these individuals who were Holocaust survivors to work with you? How do you find them?
We became quite acquainted with the Deputy Prime Minister of Israel. I invited him to the Rose Bowl back in 2011 to speak in front of about 32,000 Christians that we gathered on November 11th. And they prayed for Aaron. Aaron then moved up to a greater position in the government as Director General to the Prime Minister. He was working as one of the departmental Deputy Prime Ministers with Danny Ayalon. He is now, I'm in touch with him all the time, he is the one that has the database of where every Holocaust survivor is in the country. Every Holocaust survivor in Israel has a complimentary living quarters offered to them by the Israeli government. So there are no Holocaust survivors that are homeless, but some of them only have $200 to $300 coming in a month for money. So 43,000 of them are in poverty, and so they have to choose between heating their house, Steve, or buying their medication, or food sometimes. So what we're doing now, in fact, I just met with the CEO of one of our organizations in Los Angeles yesterday. He was here in the Rogue Valley, and Israel Food Outreach that works with YWAM, which I'm a part of, will be sending 100 tons of food in the next 2 months to Israel to be distributed. And that comes from Gleanings for the Hungry in Fresno, Dinuba area, the YWAM base that develops all this food. So we'll be shipping 4 containers, about 27 tons of food in each container.
Wow, amazing.
And with that, this is kind of, you remember the
this is, I can tell you're a part of a whole umbrella group of agencies. Go ahead, you were going to say?
Well, the exciting thing is, remember in the days of 30, 40 years ago when churches made quilts for missionaries? Well, we have rebirthed that. And in fact, I'm looking for churches that we're sending 500 quilts in this next shipment. It's all actually on the water already. But to have a visitor, what we call a visitor to Holocaust, to survivors, go to the survivor's home, take some soup mix, some food, dried food, and also then take a quilt. You cannot imagine the impact that has on the survivors to have a Christian come into their home, bring them a quilt. It's funny because some of the quilts are really, they're a mishmash of colors. Right. And so often we've taken them into a home, and some of the colors in some of the Holocaust survivors' apartments are really wild, and we'll look and go, you know what, this quilt matches their colors, and go, this must be a sovereign thing of the Lord's. So we would like to have some ladies in different churches kind of restore this quilt making.
So you have a desire to have more of that going on? Right?
Yes.
So you're kind of making a plea right now. Okay.
I am.
Go ahead, make away.
Make some quilts, sew some quilts together, ladies, and we will deliver them in your church's name or your name to these survivors. And you ought to see the tears when they get a gift like that. Survivors do not have their hands out looking for money. They have survived that kind of mentality. But when you bring them a gift, or you bring yourself to their house, because fundamentally survivors have one need, and that is they're lonely. So when a Christian visits them, that is like gold. That's a wonderful thing.
That's amazing. And in your location in Caesarea, you actually have places for some of them to stay? Is that right?
They come. We have survivor evenings where we have dinners for them about twice a week. And the reason we opened up this the Caesarea Villa is because of costs for people to go there. Because it has a large kitchen, we're able to cut down the costs of food, because if you eat out in Israel, it's expensive, and the cost of housing. So we can cut the cost of housing down by almost 2/3, and we can cut food down by 75%. That makes it affordable for people to go and actually be involved in ministry.
Amazing.
Otherwise, you're spending, you know, $4,000 on a trip or a tour. And people cannot afford.
That's right.
Many people that want to minister cannot afford that.
All right, Jeff Shelton. He's, as you can tell, involved in a lot of organizations. How do people get in touch with you? What's the best way? Do you have a website or email or something?
They can find the villa on Facebook under Caesarea Villa.
Caesarea Villa. Look it up on Facebook. And if you need more info, you can call Sue, and I'm sure she'll help you. Jeff, thanks for being with us, giving us an update on what you're doing with Holocaust survivors in Israel.
It's an exciting time.
All right. Stay tuned. Coming up, we're going to be looking at a film, kind of a preview in a way, of An Epidemic of Distortion. It has to do with the suicide rate among those who are returning soldiers. And we're going to be filling you in on all of that coming up in our next segment here on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Well, welcome back to Focus Today. In this segment, we have a fascinating discussion that is of serious importance as we're hearing more about people who come back and have post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of their military service. Sometimes, I mean, I'm amazed at how many times some of these individuals have had to go back into combat time and time again, multiple times. I don't think we've seen that in wars until recently, the past few years. Dennis Davis is with us. He's a producer and director of a film called An Epidemic of Distortions, and it has to do with the stories you may have heard and some you may not have heard about those who are surviving and suffering from PTSD. Dennis, I appreciate you being with us. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Give us an overview, without me asking too many questions about what this film is about. What was your desire when you were coming together with the ideas for this? What is it you wanted to actually film?
Well, very simply put, we want to tell the positive stories of veterans who have survived but also thrived despite and oftentimes because of their PTSD. We hear the negative stories all too often in the media and the movies, and they portray many misconceptions, distorted views on post-traumatic stress, like we're ticking time bombs, we're violent, we're not capable of success beyond the military, we're broken and need to be fixed, and all of those just really aren't true for the most part, and we wanted to bring some positive stories, and we feel that the world needs that, the country needs that, and the veterans certainly need that.
You know, I think that when we hear of somebody who says, you know, I'm a military veteran and I suffer from PTSD, all of a sudden people are saying, okay, how do I treat this person so that they don't, like you're saying, flip out? That would be the idea that we're having. With that kind of a misconception, what does a public need to know on how to react to that kind of a statement when somebody says, I have this problem?
Well, you know, PTSD is not, it's post-traumatic stress, PTSD. It's not PMSD, post-military stress. It is caused by trauma. So anybody can have post-traumatic stress. You could be in a car accident. You know, anybody that I come into contact with, you come into contact with, could be a victim of assault or a crime, have lost a loved one in a very tragic situation. So those are all things that can lead to PTSD. The military is good at causing trauma in certain missions, but it is not the driving force behind PTSD. So I think the first thing is to realize that this could just as easily be my next door neighbor who was in a bad car accident last month and suffers from PTSD as it would be a military person. And the second thing is understand that, you know, if they're willing to talk about it, they're probably doing really well and probably have handled it in a way that's allowing them to go on to be successful and probably driving them to be successful in many respects.
What is the current methodology for those who have been diagnosed that way? How does our medical community treat them, and do they do so successfully?
I can only speak not as a medical professional, but from my own experiences and my first counseling experience. I called into a line that was available to military personnel and was scheduled with an appointment, I believe, the next day. And the counselor decided not to show up. They had an administrative error, not really the greatest thing to do early in the morning with a semi-suicidal person, not show up for the appointment. And then 2 appointments in, just really had a hard time. The counselor had a hard time with what I was describing, and the challenge was they weren't there, and yet they're having a hard time with it. Imagine how I feel because I was there, and those tapes are constantly replayed in my mind. So I found another counselor through the same resource, and ended up being Christian. We were of like faith, and really helped me process the changes in my life. So the opportunities are out there, finding the right person, whether it's faith-based or not, to be able to understand that this is the way God created us. Our brains are beautifully and wonderfully made, and that this is how we process trauma. And to know that it's not happening again, we can work through it and not avoid triggers, but understand how to deal with them so that we can live a normal and healthy life.
Well, from your experience, and it sounds like, like in any profession, there's going to be individuals who kind of succeed better at their profession than others, and for those medical personnel the same way. How does one know how you're going to get a good doctor or a medical team to work with somebody with PTSD? Since, like you say, it's kind of a critical thing. If you're suicidal, you want to get that how would I say, under some sort of treatment as soon as possible. How do you find the right person?
That was just a blessing from God for me. I would encourage people, specifically if they're looking for a mental health provider, somebody that has dealt with trauma and PTSD or PTSD. A lot of places in the country, you're not going to have a lot of veterans in the area, so they may not have a lot of experience dealing with military, but somebody that's dealt with trauma with first responders, the type of trauma that we may deal with in the military, and is familiar with that, then their counseling methods are going to be such that they're used to dealing with that and understanding that. Somebody that's dealing with other family issues, divorce issues, relationship issues, I don't know that they're equipped cognitively to be able to deal with it, but mentally and emotionally, it's a lot when you kind of dump this is what I'm going through on somebody's lap. So I think finding somebody that has experience dealing with trauma is the first step, and probably finding somebody that can help you.
Okay, Dennis Davis is our guest. He's a producer and director of a film called An Epidemic of Distortions. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the distortions. You've kind of touched on it a little bit. What are the other things that are distorted about what PTSD is all about, and how to be a friend to somebody who's got the problem and work with them?
Well, I think that many of the distorted views, and I've seen them on the other side of the hiring desk in my private sector career, but that military causes it, that all veterans have it, because you wore the uniform you have it, because you deployed you have it, that we're broken, that we need to be fixed, that we can't achieve success outside of the military or beyond the military, again, because we're broken. And those are most of the stereotypes and distorted views that just aren't true. And then the other one, that we are violent. We're not violent. The statistics prove that when we're violent, we're typically violent towards ourselves, and that bears out in the suicide rate of 22 veterans a day committing suicide.
Wow.
What I would say for people that are in touch with a veteran or anybody that has post-traumatic stress is just being sensitive to how they respond to things. Everybody has different triggers. If it's a veteran and it's combat related, mine is not directly combat related, but if it was combat related, being sensitive to even things like 4th of July. There are many veterans that they love 4th of July, but they have a lot of trouble with the fireworks. if they're combat related. So things like that, that just being sensitive and not poking fun at, well, why can't you go to fireworks? What, are you scared? You've been to Iraq, you can't go to fireworks? Well, there's triggers there that affect them negatively. And so whatever those triggers are, they may seem silly and trivial to you, but they're probably a big deal to that person. So being able to be sensitive and help them through those things, and that is, I think, probably the best thing, is just being supportive and being a friend and understanding that they're forever changed. They're not broken. They don't need to be fixed, but they are changed, and they are going to live a different life, and that's okay.
Let me ask you, is PTSD a problem that some people can hide, or is that something? Is it very hard to hide that? Have you known vets who might have been able to do that successfully?
I believe typically that people that have PTSD don't always understand it at first. I know I didn't understand it for 3 or 4 years.
Wow, really?
You tend to self-medicate. You know, why is this happening? I can't sleep at night. I'm having issues with these types of things, and so you take something to get to bed, whether you turn to alcohol, to over-the-counter medication, to drugs, and that's not painting us with a negative brush. It's, you know, we have challenges, we can't really figure them out on our own sometimes, and that's, you know, before we get help, that's kind of the first step usually. Yeah. So you can still function. I did for several years until I had what I call the wheels coming off my wagon incident, and that really, you know, and then I felt like I lost all control, and it was no longer possible simply to do those things. I needed help to be able to understand what was happening and how I could recover and live a healthy life again.
Wow. Well, and then for you to also make this movie, that had to have been another major step also to kind of revisit the whole issue again, I would imagine.
Absolutely. There's a challenge there in writing, you know, my own story for the movie. Was the hardest to write, and the other stories that I'm working on, we have the people already. I've done the interviews, so we're just seeking the funding to be able to make the film. Yeah. The other stories are not nearly as difficult to write. It's always more difficult to write about yourself, but at the same time, it's cathartic, and that's one thing I would encourage veterans or anybody with post-traumatic stress, is reach out for help and be able to talk about this, find the right person to talk with, because the more you talk, it's like a release valve. The more you get out, the better you're going to feel.
Dennis, briefly, where can people get An Epidemic of Distortions, a film you made?
Right now we are going through the funding campaign, so
is it
on Kickstarter.
Kickstarter, okay, all right, and then we can follow it there, right?
Absolutely, they can go to redeployed.net/Kickstarter.
Okay, Dennis Davis, the producer and director of Epidemic of Distortion. Thank you.
Thank you.
And join us again.
Hi, I'm Jim, and I work at theDove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us.